You know, I often find myself thinking about all these influential people from our past. And I'm talking about the very, very influential ones. The ones that made it into the history books, the ones that we still talk about to this very day, the ones that have drastically reshaped the way we view the world and our beliefs, and the ones that, you know, the ones that have kind of steered society in the direction it's gone. And the reason I find myself thinking about this is because I wonder, what is it about these people that made them so influential? And I think this is something that's very, very important. I think there's something that is very profound that we can take away from this, because there's something that's happening in the background that could actually spell the end of influential people as we know it. So to set the stage on this, let's just talk about a couple of them. All right, so Sir Isaac Newton. This man was very influential because his ideas and his beliefs at the time, the stuff he talked about, it was very unconventional, but it completely reshaped our understanding of the natural world. Albert Einstein is another prime example of that, because his theories about relativity, at the time, they were very unconventional, but they reshaped our understanding of the universe. Another prime example of this is Jesus Christ. All right, and regardless of what you believe, whether you believe in religion or not, fact remains, this is one of the most influential people on the planet. He is the central figure of Christianity, and he has inspired billions upon billions of people. And his ideas and his vision and his beliefs have completely reshaped people's belief systems. They have completely influenced how people behave. And there are even some people that were very, very influential that on the surface it might not seem like they were. And I would say to see the influence that these people had, sometimes seeing that takes having an open mind. It takes checking your biases and your morality and maybe even your beliefs and your emotions at the door. And one person that fits directly into that category is the German guy from the 1930s, the one from World War II. You know which one I'm talking about. And I'm not even sure if I can say his name. You know, I don't want the thought police coming after me, so I'm not going to say it, but that guy. And regardless of what you think about that person, fact is, his vision and what he did had a massive impact on the world around us. And not only did it have an impact at the time, it had an impact even to this very day, because his vision and his idea, it influenced millions of people to the point that he created an army that followed behind him. And those events that transpired from all that led to one of the bloodiest conflicts of all time. But those events also drastically influenced the world around us. And America's interstate systems are a very small example of that, because our interstate systems are largely based on 1930 Germany's Autobahn system. And when you take all of these influential people and you consider that they all come from different walks of life, and the ways in which they have influenced the world is drastically different, there is one very specific and very profound thing that they all have in common. And that is the very thing that has allowed them to have the influence that they had. And it wasn't money, it wasn't power, it wasn't status. The one thing that they all had in common that allowed them to have the influence they had was an idea. It was a unique vision based off a very individualized life experience. And all of that stemmed from a free and untamed mind. And the problem here is that we now live in an era where these new ideas and these unique visions, they're no longer encouraged. And it is becoming increasingly more difficult with every single day that passes to think critically and to speak your mind freely. And I would say that we're free to speak our mind until we're not. We're free to speak our mind until we say something that goes against the common narrative. And I think I've kind of proved my own point by self-censoring the German guy's name, because I don't know if by saying his name, that's going to paint a target on my back. I don't know if the thought police are going to come after me for uttering a man's name, and that really highlights the situation we found ourselves in. So what happens when the voice of the potentially influential no longer has any reach? What happens when that voice is silenced? What kind of world would we be living in if the voices of all these influential people we just talked about and so many others didn't have a reach? What happens if their voices were silenced? What happens if their ideas and their unique visions could not reach an audience? In some cases, maybe that means that things would have turned out drastically different. In the case of the German guy, maybe that would have been a good thing. But that's not the case for everything. And we also don't know if everything worked out exactly the way it was meant to. And if things would have changed, maybe we wouldn't even be here today. So we have to wonder if some of those influential voices from our past would have been silenced. Would we still be living in the Stone Age? And there are multiple issues in modern society that could be very real threats when it comes to this. A prime example of that is the fact that most people's voices are confined and contained to an algorithm. They're contained to these platforms. But what happens if you say something that the thought police don't agree with and you get the boot? What happens when you're kicked off the platform and your voice is silenced? What happens when your idea and your unique vision no longer has an audience? In that sense, you don't necessarily lose your voice. You just lose your ability for people to hear it. And another drawback to this technological world that we have now found ourselves in is that a lot of the information that's out there can easily be manipulated. It can be misconstrued and taken out of context. It can be deleted. And we saw that around the 2020 era because there were hundreds and even thousands of research papers that suddenly disappeared from the internet, and they were never added back in. So as you can see, it's very easy when we are dealing with technology to remove, replace, and alter information, ideas, visions. Back in the 1930s, back when that one guy existed, they used to call that book burning, and that is something they did. But today, it's as easy as clicking the button on a mouse. And speaking of book burning, that is also a thing that is happening because a lot of the information that's out there that is in books is being consumed. It is being gobbled up by these AI companies. They're buying books by the millions. They're cutting the ends off. They're scanning them in, and they're using them to train their AI models. And then after they're done with the books, they destroy them. And when you think about what a book is, books are another prime example of an untamed mind, a mind that is free to think critically. And words just flow out of people, and it flows onto the text, and that is what's being destroyed. They're not destroying the book. They're destroying the idea. They're destroying the vision. And the sad reality is that we are now living in a world that is being saturated by surveillance. All these flock cameras and all these surveillance systems are being put in place by the thousands. And it's not going to be long before you can't leave your house without being monitored. And when you think about the implications of that, sure, you still have your voice, but is knowing that you're constantly being monitored 24/7 by the cameras and the phone in your pocket and all the digital infrastructure around us, is that going to cause people to self-censor just like I did? Is that going to lead to active subconscious suppression of the mind? I think it might, because just the idea of knowing that somebody's listening to what you're saying is enough to make people question what they say, especially if there are repercussions for saying something that the thought police don't agree with. And it's not just surveillance that's causing that suppression. It's also pacification. Because we in this modern world are very, very comfortable. We are surrounded with comfort. We have TV, movies, entertainment, streaming. We have phones, we have social media, we have all of this pacification around us. Even the food that has been created for us, all that hyper-palatable stuff that people can't get enough of, it is all pacification, and it is centered around comfort. And all of that pacification, all of that comfort and convenience, it poisons the mind, and it suppresses us. It numbs our drive and ambition and freedom of expression. When it comes to things like social media, groupthink often takes precedence, and then suddenly your ideas are no longer your own, and your ideas are the ideas of everybody else. Because how can you come up with your own ideas when your mind is full of everyone else's? This causes personal expression to become lost, and we lose ourselves. Visions and ideas stop being new and unique and just become visions and ideas. There's nothing special about them. So what kind of world are we going to be living in when the voices of these potentially influential people starts being snuffed out? What happens when innovation and new ideas and unique visions can no longer reach anyone? What happens when that stuff is no longer encouraged? Are we just going to become stagnant and stale and regress? Are we going to end up with fewer influential people and a controlled population that only fits into a specific mold and thinks a certain way? And I think the answer to this question has kind of revealed itself throughout the years, because we've seen this happen. We've had people that have come up with all of these amazing inventions that could drastically reshape the world and challenge the conventional systems of control. And we've seen those people disappear. And along with them, their ideas, their visions. And when this happens, it discourages people. people suddenly stop focusing on influence and they start focusing on the wrong stuff. They start focusing on the money and the power and the status, all the stuff that really doesn't matter. And through all that, people suddenly forget what makes us influential in the first place. It is not those things. It is not the money, the power, or the status. It is the mind. That is the most powerful thing on this planet. And the reason they are trying to suppress it is because they know that. Because fact is, our world is full of unlimited and untapped potential just waiting to come to life. And it's right here. So the only limiting factor is us. And all we have to do to tap into that potential is just disconnect, free ourselves from the distractions, and establish a life around ourselves that is based around peace. Because how many of us take the time today to just disconnect and be alone with our thoughts? I think that's very few. But that is where these new ideas and these new visions come from. That's where critical thought is made. And just know that we don't have to walk this path alone, because some of the most influential people from our past, they had teams of people behind them backing them up. And in some cases, armies of people. And that is what we are. We are a collective army full of potential. And even though it might feel like we're disconnected and divided, it might feel like we're totally alone, just remember that we all have a vision on what we want the future to look like. And it is nothing like the future that is shaping up for us today. I think we all inherently want to do good. We want to create a positive impact in the world. And together, we can do that. We can create the change and become the change that we all want to see, but it all starts right here. It all starts by tapping into this unlimited potential that we all have, that at this very moment, we are at risk of losing.